half the money I spend in marketing and advertising is wasted. The only problem is I don't know which half. And that's really the problem. It's kind of like buying a diamond. It's kind of a blind item. You don't really know what you're getting.
Advertiser, yeah. Maybe you're running some Google ads, you're running some Meta ads, and that's pretty much the platforms you're running in your e-commerce space, right? What would sort of be your recommendation for those brands that?
Basically just the front end sales channel. He developed a strategy because in his own business he wasn't profitable with the strategy.
Well, it's clearly working wonders for our clients, and it's crazy to me how many agencies don't know about this at all.
Welcome everybody to the E-commerce Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Hamer, and today we have a special guest interview with Jeff Greenfield. Jeff is founder and CEO of Provalytics, which is a leading attribution company that's provided marketing insights for some of the biggest brands and advertisers in the world. We're talking JP Morgan's, US Bank, Hertz, Nestle, big players in the brand space and CPG space. And so we're excited to have him on the podcast today. And we're going to be talking about analytics. We're going to be talking about attribution. Like, it's kind of a crazy world out there. And so Jeff's going to unpack that and jump in and talk about ways in which we can practically apply that in our businesses. So with that, Jeff, welcome to the show. I'm happy that you're here, man.
Thanks, Kyle. I'm excited to be here. This is definitely an interesting time to talk about this, especially as we get closer and closer and in the middle of the shopping season. This is definitely something, media effectiveness is the top of all of our minds as marketers, without a doubt.
Absolutely, 100%. And it doesn't matter whether you have a huge budget. Obviously, you're hopefully paying more attention to your attribution if you have a huge budget or a small budget. Like, no matter what you're spending dollar for dollar, you want to be able to track effectiveness. And that's what we'd love to jump into today. I mean, probably, I guess, Jeff, what would be really helpful, just kind of unpack attribution. It's like, give us sort of a brief history and then where we're at today and what are the challenges that we're sort of facing.
Yeah, so attribution, kind of the best way to think about it is to go back to that old adage in marketing, which is half the money I spend in marketing and advertising is wasted. The only problem is I don't know which half. And that's really the problem. It's kind of like buying a diamond. It's kind of a blind item. You don't really know what you're getting for what you're paying. And going back to what you just said a minute ago about being a small advertiser versus a large advertiser, that same 50% applies. Now, for big brands, it kind of sucks because you're wasting budget that you want to get more money. But for smaller businesses, that wasted half could go towards a college tuition for a child. It could go for a lot of different things that can make a difference in somebody's life. So it's a huge problem. It's been there for a very long time, especially if we go back to before digital. That's probably one of the best ways to look at it is before digital, all we really had was what we call traditional marketing or traditional media. And that was things like television, radio, print, which was like magazines and newspapers. And then we had direct mail that would come to the home and billboards. And so really, it was really tough to kind of figure things out. If you were a small business, you could run an ad in a newspaper, maybe one, and then you see an influx from it. That's great. So you can measure that because it's the only thing you're doing. But once you start running in 4 different newspapers at the exact same time, unless you run different phone numbers, which is what people did, it was tough to track. So imagine you're a larger brand and you're running in every single newspaper in the US and you're running on TV and radio at the same time. It's almost impossible to sit down with pen and paper and figure out what's working. And so what was utilized back then was mathematics, statistics. It was a technique called marketing mix modeling, and it looked at the correlation and looked at the contribution that each of the marketing channels made towards sales. And what I mean by that is you could gather up all of your newspapers together to tell you what was the impact of print newspaper or print magazine. You couldn't really break it down by newspaper, city, what actual newspaper, and the creative. And you could look at TV overall, but it'd be really difficult to tell the difference between the effectiveness of Fantasy Island or Love Boat in terms of what was actually working. But it was a great technique in terms of being able to tell brands, hey, this is what happened last year, and this is what your budget should be if you want to achieve X amount of dollars in sales. So it was kind of an annual overview, if you will. And that worked great before digital. And I say it worked great before digital because with digital, everything is like granular. It's not channels, it's how many clicks am I getting from a specific ad. You can count it down to that level. And also the number of different places that you're advertising at now has gone up tremendously. So it's a whole different way of looking at things. And marketing mix modeling was seen as slow. It was a heavy lift because you had to get 3 years worth of data in order to create something that you could actually believe in. And so what that led to was this birth of what we call multi-touch attribution, which was, hey, we've got all these clicks and we can actually add a piece of code to all of the ads so we can see all of the impressions. So Kyle, you're going through your Facebook page, we could see when you actually saw an ad for a particular brand. And so when you come over to our site and buy something, we can actually see every time you were exposed to a brand, every time you scrolled that ad into view, when you spent, how much time you spent on the ad, and every time you clicked on everything. So using some regression, we could then figure out with a best guess, if you will, because models are best guesses, which ads had more of an impact. And then when you combine that with all the thousands of people buying stuff every day for a particular brand, you get insights that can help drive a campaign forward. And that was kind of the state of things right around 2010 with the growth of multi-touch attribution. I built one of those first companies, C3 Metrics, and this kind of laid the whole foundation for how digital marketing was analyzed. And people started moving away from marketing mix modeling because MTA, as we called it, could be done much more rapidly. It gave us that level of granularity. So like if you're a search person, you didn't just know search was working and how much, you knew this campaign ad group keyword match type. This was the combination that was working the best, and these other ones turn off. So it was great for a digital marketer, gave you a lot of actions to overall improve the performance of a campaign. And that was the state of things probably right up until around COVID. In the world, when COVID came, things kind of shifted a bit because it wasn't a COVID thing that did it. It was more of this move towards privacy online that really started a couple years before in the EU with a GDPR. And then that led to this California Privacy Act, and then one in Nevada and one in Maryland, and all of these shifts. And then it was a couple of years ago, that big famous iOS update, and everybody remembers it who has an iPhone. All of a sudden it updated and you went to your Facebook and it said, do you want to allow this app to track you? And everyone said, of course I don't.
Sure.
And because it was default behavior before then, but when you ask people, do you want to opt into this? The majority will say no. And so that led to a series of changes that kind of find us where we are today.
So what's then the solution to that? Because obviously that had an impact on advertisers, right? Everyone was online, be like, oh, my Facebook ads don't work anymore, or it's toast, it's garbage, there's no good data. So how has the industry adapted?
Yeah, so, and essentially what happened is that all of that level of granularity, if you think back to what I described before for multi-touch attribution, where we're collecting all of that data, we could still get all the click data, but the impression data of when you saw the ad or when it showed up on your screen and how long you saw it for, we couldn't get that data anymore. We especially couldn't get it from iOS. It dropped from Firefox. And then in certain places like Facebook, where we used to be able to put tags, they didn't allow it anymore. So if you kind of go back to 2015, which seems like forever ago, Facebook was like, it was important, it was growing, but it wasn't like half of somebody's budget. So it wasn't a big deal when they said you can't see this data anymore. But now it's a big deal. And that concept is what we call a walled garden, meaning I'm my own world. You can, when someone clicks out of this world, you'll know about it. And I'll tell you how many impressions there were each day. But I'm not going to let you put a tag there because that's going to slow things down. And that's privacy wise, that doesn't work. So that happened. It happened with YouTube. And then we have all these other sites like Walmart, the retail media. We have the TikToks, the Snapchats of the world. So now we have these walled gardens. And then we also have on top of it, this new media where we have digitized media, which is not click-based. So this is a first because the whole birth of digital was about being able to count clicks. And we all have that Google sheet for running campaigns where we've got how many clicks we have each day with each platform, how much we spent, and our click-through rate. We've got all of that in our cost per click. But if that's the case, how do we track CTV with that method? There's nothing to click on. And how do we track podcast advertising? There's nothing to click on. So now we're entering this world where we don't have the impressions from the walled gardens. We can't track everything. And there's all this new media. And then also for those of us who spend a lot of time digging into Meta, where we used to be able to really dig down, like you could buy media. I could target Ford F-150 leaseholders whose lease was going to expire in 6 months.
Right.
I can't do that anymore. That's all gone. So it's almost like digital went through this transformation where we got all of this data that was so available and we got so used to targeting at such a granular level. And now none of that's available anymore. And the way I look at it is though, we've gone back to the future, if you will.
Sure.
We are now back to the way things used to be before digital. Because before digital, the way we targeted was based on where someone lived and kind of like their zip code, because you know things about zip codes. You know the socioeconomic class of people in a certain zip code. And so we're kind of back to those levels again. So what we did is we started to say, well, what did we do back in those days? Well, we did that marketing mix modeling, but we hated that for all of these reasons. And we liked multi-touch attribution for all of these reasons. So how can we merge those two worlds together to get what we need and want, but without that level of granularity that we required before? And that's what we did at our company is we took the best of both worlds, put them together and leveraged the power of fast computers and AI. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. The stuff we're doing today, we could not have done 5 years ago. We could have, but it would have taken 7 months to get a month's worth of data. So things have turned around. So now most marketers are realizing that they kind of have to pan the camera back, that user level view of the world that we've been used to as digital marketers is gone or going away, and it's not going to come back. So we have to look and plan and measure and target differently than we ever did before, kind of the way we did before digital.
Super interesting. So it is sort of a back to the future cyclical approach. So that is a good transition because so say you are a brand and you are maybe not a super sophisticated advertiser yet. Maybe you're running some Google ads, you're running some Meta ads, and that's pretty much the platforms you're running in your e-commerce space, right? What would sort of be your recommendation for those brands that aren't ready maybe to take on Provalytics in terms of what you guys do at that level, but you're like, I'm just getting ready to go. What would be the advice that you'd give them?
Yeah, the best advice for that is to first off, in your current analytics that you're using, and chances are you're using GA4,
right?
Is to recognize that when you look in GA4 and it tells you that 95% of people are buying within 24 hours, and the rest within 48 hours, to completely ignore that. That's false. It's not true.
Right.
It's based upon the data that Google has. And you also have to recognize the fact that Google Analytics is Google's analytics. It's doing a really bad job of looking at Meta, but doing a good job of looking at kind of Facebook. So what you've got is you have two versions of the truth, if you will, maybe. And so if you look in Google Analytics, it's going to tell you what's actually working. And then you look at Meta, and Meta is going to give you a completely different version. So for example, on one day, Google Analytics may say that Meta had 5 conversions, 5 orders, and Meta may say we had 35. Yeah. So what you have to do is you kind of have to put on a different hat, and you have to say, well, I know it's not 5, and it's probably not 35. So I know it's somewheres in between those two. So that's the first thing, is you have to recognize that everything you're looking at is wrong, and the truth is someplace in the middle there. That's number one. So you always kind of have to look at it. You have to put on, I guess the best way a good analogy is, years ago, one of my first careers is I was a chiropractor. And as a chiropractor, you have to read x-rays. And so I had a radiology professor, and x-rays are very difficult to read because it is a 2-dimensional picture of a 3-dimensional object. And I remember looking at an x-ray once, and I remember leaning to the side, like I was trying to look at an angle, and there is no angle to look at. It's just a picture.
Right.
And my radiology professor said to me, he said, listen, when you look at x-rays, you kind of have to take your x-ray drugs, because you have to imagine that when you lean, you're looking around, but you're not. So as a marketer, when you're looking at GA and you're comparing to what you see in Meta, you have to take your marketing drugs. You have to understand that nothing's right. The answer is someplace in the middle. The question is it closer to 35 that Meta shows, or is it closer to 5? So the way around that is to go back to that Google sheet that we talked about before, that everybody keeps, and go up to the top of it and open a new column, add a new column, and call this column impressions. Because clicks are what people do once they're already aware. Right. People don't see an ad and just click on it right away and they're interested. The way that marketing works is that you buy ads, and what you're buying is you're buying impressions, which are eyeballs. So you buy those eyeballs with the purpose of building awareness. That awareness, when it gets to be at a certain level, that leads to people visiting your store, and in this case happens to be online, which is represented in clicks. So when you look at that Google sheet and all you're looking at are clicks and sales, you're way down the funnel. So add a column and call it impressions, and go back for like the last year and total up the impressions each day that are in market. Because what you're going to notice is that when you put impressions in market, you're going to have an impact that day. But in many instances, because of what we call the time to conversion, which is how long it takes people to move from awareness to interest, where they actually come and visit, may take a longer period. It may take 3 or 4 days. It could take 2 weeks. Sometimes you may do a big buy and not see an impact until 30 days later. So you want to start to stagger kind of the way, and this, again, you got to take your marketing drugs where you look at the difference between impressions and sales, and you'll start to notice that maybe you'll be able to figure out from that spreadsheet, what is that days to conversion? And that's, again, taking those marketing drugs. So that's my recommendation, is look at the differences in the platforms, understand none of them are right, but it's someplace in the middle, and then add that impression column so that you can start to see the relationship between impressions of market each day and what your actual sales are days and weeks later.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good advice. You know, it's funny you mentioned that, because oftentimes when I'm talking with clients, we are kind of breaking down the business, right? Because businesses have a lot of moving parts to it, right? But for many of us that are in e-commerce specifically, at the end of the day, if you boil it all down, you're just in an eyeballs business. You need your target customer's eyeballs looking at your product not just when they're ready to buy, but they need to be aware of your brand. Probably 7, 10, 13 times they need to interact with your brand before they're actually ready to make a conversion decision, before they're ready to make a purchase, right? And so you need to have that brand awareness, the impression piece of it, because that's really what you're optimizing for ultimately online, right? They're not walking through the store, picking it up and holding it in their hand and putting it back on the shelf. They're just going about their day. They're searching, they're seeing stuff on social, they're seeing influencers or content creators giving them recommendations. And that is that awareness piece of it that has to get factored into your decision making. And if you only look at like, I want to click and I want a ROAS number, right? It's like, how much did I spend and what was that actual dollar? And you ignore sort of that brand impression piece that's top of the funnel, I think it becomes a lot harder for you to sort of maximize your end result.
No, you're spot on there, Kyle. 100%. It's those clicks are so much further down the funnel than folks realize, and you're doing yourself a disservice. But guess what? Google wants you to be that far down the funnel. That's what they want, because when you're hyper focused on clicks, what ends up happening is you are optimizing your campaign to those clicks. And
Sure.
what that means is you're way down at the bottom. So you are fighting constantly against your competitors. And years ago, before there was digital, this wasn't a problem because ads cost what they cost. You know, a half-page ad in a magazine was X. You know, if you bought enough quantity, you would get a discount. But now every ad is a real-time bid. And when everyone is down at the bottom of the funnel, bids go up dramatically. That's why the cost per click keeps going up every quarter. And that's why profits for both Meta and for Google continue to go up. And the rates that they're going up are much higher and much faster than the rates of all of us that are paying for advertising.
Sure.
So there's going to be kind of a moment. It's going to be coming soon. I don't know when it'll happen, but these rates keep going up so fast. Now, the answer is for marketers to step back and realize that at the top of the funnel, it's a lot cheaper to advertise there because you're not hyper focusing. The argument is, well, maybe you're wasting money because you're targeting people that maybe wouldn't buy. But the answer is, well, give them a chance. Maybe they will.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with you. So this leads me to another question for you. Based on your experience working with a lot of brands, big, small, all in between, what do you recommend sort of the budget mix? Like, obviously you want to have some of your budget focused on bottom of the funnel conversion, driving sales. And then some of that budget needs to be focused on impressions, brand, visibility. Where have you found the best balance of that?
Well, what I can tell you is that dollars that are spent in the upper part of the funnel return twice as much revenue as those at the bottom part of the funnel. And that's not my, yeah.
Interesting.
That's not my research. That comes from Orlando Wood out of the UK. One of the best marketing books out there called Lemon, How the Advertising Brain Turned Sour, available on Amazon. It's like $60. Highly recommended for any marketer to read it and understand it. But this is why you're starting to notice larger brands who for years have put their dollars lower funnel. Mm-hmm. You're starting to notice they are now moving not mid-funnel, but upper funnel. They're starting to do more and more branding. One of the best well-known brands that's doing this is Airbnb. So a lot of brands are starting to do that because the ROI upper funnel is so much greater than it is lower funnel. And when you think about it as like a small business person, let's think about like a business owner. Let's say you own a heating and air conditioning business in a town. Mm-hmm. The difference would be between spending dollars on pay-per-click versus sponsoring a little league. Right. So sponsoring a little league is upper funnel because not just every weekend, but all season long, your sign is up there and you get people driving by constantly. Or an out-of-home ad, like a billboard. That would be an upper funnel type ad. Yeah, so those pay off so much more.
Which is kind of interesting too, because I've seen some data that sort of pointed to where brands are spending more even on like influencers, right? Content creators. They're not necessarily, I mean, yeah, they're recommending you, but you're kind of getting a referral, plus you're getting access to their potential big audience, right? Of followers that's very top of funnel. And you kind of think of influencers kind of top of funnel in that aspect. And that has, you know, from the data that I was looking at, the budgets are kind of pushing in that direction for sure. And the other thing I think that's super interesting is with like, you know, TV ads, right? Like OTT, digital TV ads now available almost at like the same cost price point as you would if you were running ads on Meta and Google. Like it's pretty ubiquitous now. There's plenty of platforms you could just run those ads, those TV spots, right? Where you could go top of funnel in these scenarios easier, I think, than even you could in the past.
Oh, it's so much easier. You can take a video that you have running on YouTube and use it as a spot. And what you don't realize, for a lot of consumers, when they see a TV ad, even on YouTube running, like pre-roll or midstream, the value of that, because the right now the only brands that are running on there are larger, more established brands. Right. But when a smaller brand goes on there, it elevates you. It's like, oh wow, they're on YouTube, they're on TV. And going back to what you said about influencers, even though this feels like it's something new, it's not really, because the power influencers is the same thing as what brands have done for years in product placement, kind of like James Bond. So you could look at James Bond as an influencer. Sure. He's a fashion icon. So, you know, James Bond has a watch that he's wearing or a car that he's driving. And what that is an implied endorsement. Now, the only difference is that the influencers are supposed to, because of the way the laws are, is to say, hey, this is the paid, you know, I'm being paid to do this, but I really love it. That's what they always say. It's great. I use it myself all the time. Right. But you're getting that, just like you said, that referral, that implied endorsement that goes along with the use. And it's so powerful. It really is.
I love it. Literally, I mean, that whole concept of ROI at the impression level being twice as powerful than ads at the conversion level, just kind of, it made so much sense. A light bulb went on, you know, and based on, you know, the book recommendation, which I think people should go out and grab. It sounds amazing. And then based on your data and what you're seeing, we can't ignore it. And I think that's sort of been we've been very, because we had such good multi-touch attribution, we could get super granular. I think that sort of shifted everyone's thinking to get as granular as possible. And what I hear you saying is, no, that's not the way it's going to work moving forward. You have to back it up. You have to think about the full funnel and really invest appropriately at each stage of that funnel across the different channels.
Absolutely, because when you hyper target, you are layering in an additional cost to your advertising. You have the cost to run the ad, but every targeting criteria you add on there, your rates go up dramatically. For sure. And so what ends up happening is you're going to gain customers, but you may not be profitable at the end of the day. The advantage of being upper funnel is your reach is so much greater. You're reaching tens or hundreds of times more consumers. It's less expensive because you're not hyper targeted. And so what you want is you want reach. That's what you want as a brand. You want to tell more people about it. But you're absolutely right. You need to be in all of the different parts of the funnel. What you don't want to be is just be upper funnel and let your competitors come in and conquest. It really kind of stinks as a brand because you have to be in all these places all at once, but that's the way the world is today, unfortunately.
No, it's super interesting. Well, this was a great conversation. I appreciate you being on the podcast. If you're interested in learning more about what Jeff does, check out his website. It'll be in the link in the description. Also, he's got a couple of free resources for you to use. One is an attribution certification that you or your team member can just go through, take it. I actually had one of my team members go through it, so they said he really learned a lot from it. It was very informative. And they also has a 2025 playbook, which is all about, so talk a little about the playbook really fast, and then so people can jump in and grab that.
Yeah, the playbook kind of gives you a great foundation of where things are headed, tells you what all the changes are that have happened and what's coming in the future, kind of prepares you for what the next steps are, and gives you a more detailed look into the methodology in terms of how we do things at Provalytics and what makes us unique.
I love it. So you want to make sure and grab the attribution certification as well. I mean, the big takeaway for me was don't ignore impressions, don't ignore top of funnel. Think about your marketing from a full channel, full funnel, and super interesting. So Jeff, thanks for being on E-commerce Leader Podcast. Look forward to connecting with you in the future, and I hope everybody learned some stuff like I did.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle.